Hey friends, today we're diving into one of the most awe-inspiring events in history, the eruption of Krakatoa in 1883, when the sky turned black and the ocean rose with unstoppable force. Imagine feeling the ground tremble beneath your feet, seeing mountains of water and ash engulf the land, and witnessing the planet unleash its raw power in a single, unforgettable moment. If you enjoy exploring the wonders of our world and learning in a calm, immersive way, make sure to like the video and subscribe. And hey, I'd love to know where you're watching from right now and what time it is where you are, so drop it in the comments below. So put on your headphones, close your eyes. It's made for relaxation and learning. The sea around Java and Sumatra has always been alive with sound. The waves roll in slow rhythms like the breathing of a sleeping world. The air smells of salt and spice, carrying the voices of fishermen calling to one another in the soft light of morning. And out in the Sunda Strait, where the waters shine in shades of green and blue, a dark island rises, shaped by fire. This island is called Krakatoa. Krakatoa is not like other islands. It does not simply sit in the ocean, quiet and still, it breathes. Deep under the waves, the earth is restless. Plates of rock, heavier than mountains, grind against one another in silence. The seafloor trembles and molten rock, glowing like liquid sun, pushes upward. That fiery pressure shapes Krakatoa. Every rock, every cliff, every grain of black sand tells the story of fire. The people who live along the coasts of Java and Sumatra know the island well. To them, Krakatoa is both beautiful and dangerous. Fishermen see its slopes each day, rising high above the waves, covered in green trees that sway in the sea breeze. Birds circle its ridges, monkeys chatter in its forests. Yet the people also know the stories whispered from grandparents to children. The island has a temper. It has roared before and it will roar again. To the casual eye, Krakatoa seems calm. Waves lap against its black shores. Palm trees sway gently. Smoke curls only faintly from its peak, as if the mountain is just breathing out a thin sigh. But this sigh is the hint of a hidden power, for beneath that peaceful mask lies a heart made of fire. The Sunda Strait has always been a place of crossing. Traders sail their wooden boats between the islands, carrying spices, cloth, and stories. At night, lanterns glow on the decks, their light reflected in the waves. From a distance, Krakatoa looms as a silent watchman, its dark outline cutting against the starlit sky. Few travellers forget the sight. The mountain seems alive, as though it is listening. Scientists of the 19th century began to wonder about Krakatoa. They saw the tremors, the puffs of smoke, the strange sounds that rolled across the sea. Some called it a restless volcano waiting for its hour. But in 1883, many still did not understand how such islands were born. They only knew that fire and stone seemed to come from nowhere, shaping land out of the sea. To them, Krakatoa was a mystery written in smoke and ash. The island itself was not large. About 5 miles across, it rose sharply from the water, its peak reaching high into the sky. 3 connected cones made up its shape, Watan in the north, Danan in the centre, and Rakata in the south. These names carried the voices of the local people who had watched the mountain's moods for generations. The cones were like siblings, each one born of fire, each one holding its own secrets of smoke and ash. Beneath Krakatoa, the earth is never still. The Sunda Strait is part of the Ring of Fire, a chain of volcanoes that stretches around the edges of the Pacific Ocean. In this place, the Indian Ocean plate presses against the Sunda plate, sinking slowly beneath it. That collision forces rock deep inside the earth to melt. The molten rock, called magma, gathers in chambers below the crust. With time, the pressure grows. The earth cannot hold it forever. It rises, searching for cracks, for openings, for a way to breathe. Krakatoa is one of those openings. The island has always known change. Long before people arrived, eruptions built it up blast by blast year after year. Great rivers of lava poured into the sea, hissing into clouds of steam. Explosions shattered its slopes, sending black rock tumbling into the waves. Forests burned and grew back again. Birds returned. The cycle of destruction and rebirth was as steady as the tides. To live near Krakatoa was to live beside the breath of the earth itself. In the early 1880s, life seemed peaceful enough. Villages on the coasts bustled with trade. Children laughed and played along sandy shores. Coconut palms swayed in the wind. The volcano slept, at least on the surface. Farmers tilled their fields. Markets rang with the sound of voices and the smell of spices. Few thought much about the dark island on the horizon. It had been quiet for nearly 2 centuries. Only the oldest villagers remembered stories of its fiery past. But the mountain was never truly silent. Deep within, magma moved and swelled. Steam hissed through hidden cracks. Earthquakes, too small for most to feel, rippled through the ground. The island shifted in its sleep, restless. The sea creatures nearby felt it first. Fish swam oddly. Dolphins leapt in sudden bursts as if fleeing from something unseen. Even birds seemed to take notice, circling the island with sharp cries before vanishing into the forest. Still, the people of the Sunda Strait carried on. Life depended on the sea, and the sea was generous. Nets overflowed with fish. Boats glided across the water with sails billowing in the breeze. Villagers lit fires at night and told stories of gods and mountains. Krakatoa was one such mountain in those tales, a being alive, powerful, and sometimes angry. It was said that when the mountain grew restless, it was best to listen. The first time Krakatoa was known to roar in history was centuries earlier, in 416 AD, when chroniclers described an eruption so argy that the whole world shook. Ash darkened skies. Lands vanished. People believed the gods themselves were at war. The island has carried that memory ever since, a reminder of its ancient strength. By the 17th century, European sailors had mapped Krakatoa and written of its beauty. They saw its peaks rising like green towers from the sea. Some claimed it was one of the loveliest sights in the Indies. They described the forests that cloaked its slopes, the birds that filled its skies, and the strange black sands that glittered under the sun. Yet even then, they noted the smell of sulphur in the air, the hiss of steam near its shores. It was as if the island whispered a warning, "Do not forget what I am." And so in 1883, Krakatoa waited. It stood quiet, watching the world move around it. Villagers fished, merchants traded, children laughed, clouds drifted above its peaks. But deep within the earth a clock was ticking. Pressure gathered, rock shifted, magma rose. The mountain breathed in, readying for a sigh that would change the world. Whispers beneath the sea. Beneath the calm blue waters of the Sunda Strait lies a secret world. It is a place where the floor of the sea is not flat, but broken and restless. Great slabs of rock, heavier than mountains, move against each other in slow silence. One slides down, sinking into the earth, while the other rises above. This endless motion is hidden from human eyes, but it shapes the islands and seas of Indonesia. The people who fish these waters cannot see the battles beneath them. Yet every wave, every tide, every island is born from these deep, unseen forces. The Sunda Strait is part of what scientists call the Ring of Fire, a long chain of volcanoes and trenches that wraps around the Pacific Ocean. In this fire ring, the earth never rests. Plates of stone, each one larger than countries, push and grind against each other. They carry oceans and continents on their backs, moving only inches each year. But even small movements, when measured in thousands of years, can lift mountains and open seas. The islands of Indonesia, Java, Sumatra, Borneo, and so many more. are children of this restless ring. They were lifted from the sea by fire, shaped by ash and watered by endless rain. Under Krakatoa, the earth hides one of its deepest voices. As the Indian Ocean plate slides beneath the Sunder plate, parts of it melt into glowing liquid rock. This molten stone, called magma, is lighter than the solid rock around it, so it rises, pushing toward the surface. It gathers in chambers like underground lakes of fire. The more magma builds, the greater the pressure becomes, like steam trapped inside a kettle. One day the Earth must find a way to release it. When it does, a volcano is born. This story began long before people arrived. Thousands of years ago, magma burst through cracks in the sea floor, piling rock upon rock until an island appeared. That island was Krakatoa. Over centuries, eruptions built it higher, then tore it down again. Its shape changed many times, peaks collapsing, new cones rising, lava carving new paths to the sea. The Sunda Strait has always carried these scars. Beneath the calm surface, the whispers of fire continue, waiting for their moment to speak again. If you could stand on the ocean floor near Krakatoa, you would see a strange and eerie sight. Great cliffs of stone rise in darkness, cut by cracks that glow with hidden heat. Clouds of hot water burst from vents, carrying minerals that shimmer like gold dust. Tiny creatures cling to these vents, living in places where no sunlight reaches. Fish swim through the shadows, moving cautiously past the warm currents. The sea here is never still. It shakes and groans with each movement of the plates. The floor itself can lift or sink by many feet in only seconds when the Earth decides to move. Sailors of long ago did not know about tectonic plates or magma chambers, but they felt the power of the sea. They told stories of waves that rose without warning, of islands that shook as if alive, of mountains that breathed smoke. To them, the Sunda Strait was a place of both wonder and fear. They could not see the hidden battles beneath the water, but they felt their echoes. When Krakatoa roared, the sound travelled across the waves. When the ground shook, the sea answered, with tides that swallowed ships whole. These were the whispers of the earth, speaking through water and fire. In 1883, no one yet understood how deeply these forces were connected. Scientists knew something about volcanoes and earthquakes, but they did not yet see the full picture. They did not know that the sliding of plates under the sea could send shockwaves through the crust, that magma could rise in sudden floods, that the sea itself could be pulled upward to form waves taller than houses. They saw the signs: smoke, tremors, shifting seas, but the language of the earth was still a puzzle waiting to be solved. The people living near the Sunda Strait learned from experience, not from books. They felt the tremors under their feet. They saw the dark smoke that sometimes poured from Krakatoa's cones. They knew that when the mountain whispered, it was wise to listen. Their stories carried warnings, told in simple words that children could remember. The sea will rise if the mountain roars. The sky will darken if the fire wakes. These lessons were passed from parent to child, from village to village. Even so, memory fades. Generations forget. Life feels normal again until the day the whispers grow too loud to ignore. In the quiet years before 1883, the Sunda Strait seemed peaceful. Fishermen cast nets in calm waters. Traders moved between Java and Sumatra, their sails bright against the horizon. Birds called from the forests. Children played on the sand. But beneath it all, the plates kept moving. The magma kept rising. The pressure kept growing. The whispers beneath the sea grew stronger, like a drumbeat building before a storm. Most could not hear it, but the island could. Krakatoa felt the pressure deep in its roots, and it stirred in its sleep. The ocean itself carries memory of such unrest. Sometimes, when volcanoes rise beneath the waves, entire islands are born in days. Sailors tell of nights when the sea glowed red, boiling from fires below. Other times, islands vanish in an instant, swallowed by the water, as if they had never existed. The sea does not forget these things. The currents carry the ash. The waves tell the story to distant shores. In 1883, the Sunda Strait was preparing to tell one of the greatest stories the ocean had ever known. The whispers of the sea are soft at first. A tremor here, a hiss of steam there, a wave that ripples strangely, though no wind blows. A sound that travels far, echoing like thunder across the horizon. These are the first words of a warning. If the world does not listen, the whispers grow louder, until at last they become a roar that cannot be ignored. Krakatoa was entering that time. The quiet years were ending. The mountain and the sea were ready to speak together in a voice that would circle the world. A world of smoke and ash. Life around Krakatoa was rich, colourful and full of rhythm. On the coasts of Java and Sumatra, villages stretched along the shore like necklaces of wood and thatch. Palm trees swayed in the wind, bending gently toward the sea. The air smelled of fish drying in the sun and spices carried from faraway markets. Traders came from across the islands, bringing baskets of rice, cloves, cinnamon, and bright cloth that caught the sunlight like fire. Boats carved paths across the water, their sails rising like wings. The world seemed steady and safe, as if nothing could break the flow of daily life. Children laughed as they played near the surf, chasing each other with splashes of salt water. Their parents called them back when the tide grew strong, but even then the sea was more friend than foe. Fishermen paddled their canoes at dawn, casting wide nets into the glittering water. When the nets came back heavy, the men smiled, their work rewarded. Families gathered around fires in the evening, eating together while the sun melted into gold and red across the horizon. And there, in the distance, the dark shape of Krakatoa stood. It was a mountain, a neighbour, a mystery, but to most it was simply part of the scenery. The forests of Krakatoa thrived in this time. Monkeys leapt from tree to tree, their cries echoing across the island. Bright parrots darted through the canopy, flashes of green and red against the leaves. Insects hummed, frogs croaked, and the undergrowth rustled with hidden life. The black volcanic soil, rich with minerals, gave strength to the plants. Even after smaller eruptions in years past, the land healed quickly, growing thicker and greener with each return of the rains. To an outsider, the island seemed untouched, wild and free. Yet beneath its beauty, pressure built like a drumbeat no one could hear. Smoke was already becoming more common on Krakatoa. Thin plumes curled upward, drifting like pale ribbons into the sky. At first, villagers thought little of it. Volcanoes were known to smoke from time to time, letting out small sighs before settling again. But by May of 1883, the sighs were louder. Ash began to sprinkle down on passing boats, dusting their decks with grey. Some sailors said it looked like the sky itself had grown old and weary, shedding flakes of stone instead of snow. At night, faint flashes of red lit the peak, as though the mountain's heart was glowing through its skin. The world carried on, though some began to worry. Traders wrote of Krakatoa's strange activity in their logs. They described loud bangs like distant cannons and showers of pumice stones that rattled against sails. Ash clung to clothes, to hair, to every surface it touched. In the villages, farmers looked up at the mountain with unease. They had seen ash before, but never quite like this. It coated their fields, making the soil seem richer in one way, but also harder to work. Some crops withered under the grey blanket. Others grew strangely tall, fed by the minerals within. It was as if the land was both blessing and curse, gift and warning. To the children, the falling ash seemed almost magical. They held out their hands and watched the grey dust collect on their skin. They drew patterns in it on the ground, treating it like chalk. The older ones remembered their grandparents' stories, though. When the sky gives you ash, the elders said, it means the mountain is restless. The words carried weight, but still daily life was strong. The sea provided, the markets bustled, the volcano could wait. Scientists from Batavia, the city we now call Jakarta, began to take note as well. Reports of Krakatoa's activity reached them, sparking curiosity. Expeditions were planned. A few European researchers sailed close to the island, climbing its lower slopes to see for themselves. They described craters that hissed with steam, vents that roared like kettles, and stones so hot they burned through the soles of shoes. They collected samples of ash and rock, writing careful notes in thick journals. Many felt excitement, not fear. To them, Krakatoa was a natural wonder, a laboratory of the Earth's hidden forces. They could not imagine that it was also a ticking clock. By June, the sky over the Sunda Strait often carried streaks of grey. Ash clouds billowed higher, blotting out the sun. Villagers sometimes lit lamps at midday. The world around them dimmed into a shadowy dusk. The air grew heavy with the smell of sulphur, sharp and bitter, stinging the nose. Cough spread among the children, their lungs struggling against the dust. Still, people stayed. Where else could they go? Their homes, their fields, their ancestors' graves, all were tied to the land. To leave was to lose everything, and so they endured, brushing ash from their roofs, sweeping it from their paths, praying the mountain would quiet again. The sea, too, began to show strange moods. Some days the water near Krakatoa turned warm, steaming as if heated by invisible fires below. Fish swam in unusual patterns, some rising dead to the surface, their gills clogged with ash. Sailors reported waves that rose without wind, rocking boats in eerie silence. They spoke of hearing deep booms from beneath the sea, as if giants were hammering on the ocean floor. These were the whispers of magma moving, the signals of pressure rising. Few understood them, but the signs were all around, and still life clung to its rhythm. The markets rang with voices, the children laughed, the waves rolled in. At night, families gathered by lantern light, telling stories to chase away the dark. But the sky was no longer clear. Stars vanished behind a veil of smoke. The moon looked red, dimmed by dust. The world was changing slowly but surely under the breath of Krakatoa. The first tremors. The island of Krakatoa had always lived with its own heartbeat, a rhythm set not by seasons or tides but by the shifting plates deep below. For centuries, people along the coasts of Java and Sumatra had watched the island send up quiet breaths of steam, little warnings that the earth beneath them was never truly at rest. By the spring of 1883, those breaths began to change. They became sharper, darker, heavier, as though the volcano was finding its voice after a long silence. At first, few paid attention. Volcanoes, after all, were part of life in this part of the world. Ash on the wind was as natural as rain, and the earth sometimes shook like a restless sleeper. What began as whispers would soon grow into thunder. The first signs were small, almost easy to overlook. Fishermen returning from the strait noticed that the water near the island was warmer than usual. The current steamed faintly as though a giant cooking pot simmered beneath the waves. Birds that once circled Krakatoa's peaks now flew wide, avoiding the air above the island. At night, people on the shores of Java could see faint red glows flickering on the horizon, like lanterns lit by unseen hands. Some villagers thought spirits were moving through the sky. Others knew it was the mountain, restless and stirring in its sleep. On May the 20th, 1883, the first loud report echoed across the Sunda Strait. It sounded like cannon fire, deep and sudden, rolling across the water. Sailors on nearby ships turned their heads toward the island, wondering if war had broken out. When daylight came, they saw a column of smoke rising from Perboy Watan, the northernmost vent of Krakatoa. Ash drifted across the sea, soft and grey, falling like strange rain on their decks. The sailors brushed it off their clothes, unaware that they were witnessing the opening chapter of one of the greatest eruptions in history. The earth beneath Krakatoa trembled more often in the days that followed. Villages on both coasts felt the ground shift under their feet, gentle at first, like the rocking of a boat, then stronger, rattling doors and spilling water from clay jars. Children clutched their parents' arms, frightened by the shaking, but adults tried to calm them. Earthquakes were common here. The land was used to moving. Still, in their quiet moments, many wondered why the mountain's voice was growing louder. By June, Krakatoa was coughing ash almost every day. Dark plumes rose high into the sky, spreading like umbrellas until they thinned into drifting veils. The sky turned hazy, and sunsets deepened into brilliant reds and purples. Farmers noticed their crops coated in fine powder, a blanket of grey that dimmed the green of leaves. Some worried about the harvest, but others marvelled at the colours in the sky. Beauty and danger walked side by side. Sailors passing the island gave vivid descriptions. They spoke of fountains of ash bursting upward, of rocks hurled into the air like toys, of rumbling that made their ship's timbers groan. One captain wrote in his log that the sea itself seemed uneasy, lifting and falling in strange swells. He ordered his crew to steer clear of the island, even though curiosity drew their eyes toward the towering clouds. Mariners had learned long ago that beauty on the water could mask deadly storms. Krakatoa, they sensed, was no ordinary storm. As weeks passed, the volcano grew bolder. Explosions shook windows in Batavia, more than 90 miles away. The sound carried across the strait, a dull roar that made even the strongest hearts uneasy. People began to tell stories in their villages. Some believed a dragon lived beneath Krakatoa, thrashing its tail against the sea floor. Others thought the gods were angry, demanding offerings. In markets and temples, whispers filled the air. Was this a warning of something greater? The island itself was changing shape. New vents opened in its flanks, sending up bursts of fire. Ash and pumice piled along its slopes, sliding into the sea. Beaches where fishermen once landed grew black with fresh deposits. The forests of Krakatoa suffered most. Leaves withered beneath layers of ash, and animals fled toward the shore, confused and desperate. Birds circled the island less and less. The rhythm of life that had once thrived there was unravelling. On August 11th, a remarkable event occurred. 3 great columns of ash rose into the sky at once, one from each of Krakatoa's main vents, Perboewatan, Danan and Rakata. Witnesses described them as pillars holding up a dark roof of cloud, blotting out the sun above the island. Between the columns, lightning flickered, a furious light show that made even seasoned sailors shiver. Scientists would later call this phenomenon a dirty thunderstorm, caused when ash particles rubbed against one another, building static until the sky itself crackled. To those who saw it, though, it was a vision from another world, terrifying and magnificent. The tremors spread outward. Ships far from the Sunder Strait recorded compass needles trembling and barometers dipping with each pulse. The volcano was not only shaking the land, it was stirring the very air and sea around it. On the shores of Sumatra, people woke in the night to the sound of distant booms. Windows rattled, dogs howled, families gathered in their huts, whispering prayers into the dark. Even those who had lived their whole lives near volcanoes felt a growing unease. Something about Krakatoa's anger was different. It was bigger, heavier, more relentless. By mid-August, the sky near Krakatoa often looked bruised. The sun shone weakly through curtains of ash, and the air smelled of sulphur, sharp and choking. Travellers who approached too close found their throats burning, their eyes watering. The sea around the island steamed in patches, as though fires burned beneath its surface. Fish floated, belly up, poisoned by gases rising from below. To watch the island was to witness a living creature suffering, writhing, lashing out in pain. Still, many could not look away. Dutch, colonists and native villagers alike made trips to vantage points, climbing hills to watch the show. Some carried notebooks sketching the plumes and lightning, others simply stared, transfixed by the raw power of nature. It was dangerous, yes, but also hypnotic. Few had ever seen such fury at such close range. The mountain was writing its story across the sky, and people could not resist reading it. Scientists of the time were fascinated as well. The 19th century was an age of growing curiosity when men with instruments and theories sought to measure the Earth's secrets. Reports of Krakatoa's activity travelled quickly by ship and telegraph. Observatories in Batavia and beyond noted the explosions, recording times and descriptions. Some speculated about underground chambers filling with molten rock. Others wondered if the sea itself played a role, water meeting fire in a violent dance. No one, however, could predict just how violent the dance would become. As the tremors multiplied, so did the unease. By late August, entire villages along the coasts were coated in ash. Wells turned bitter, livestock grew thin, their forage ruined. Some families packed what they could and moved inland, away from the shore. Others stayed, unwilling to leave homes built over generations. They trusted that the mountain, though loud, would not cross the sea to harm them. Many had lived through eruptions before. They could not imagine the scale of what was coming, and so the days stretched on, filled with smoke and thunder. The first tremors had grown into a constant pulse, a background beat that shook dishes from shelves and sent cracks through walls. Ships in the straits sailed with caution, their captains alert to sudden waves and falling ash. At night, the horizon glowed red, the island flickering like a forge. Each explosion lit the sky, and each rumble carried across the water like a warning drum. The mountain was speaking louder and louder, but the world had not yet learned how to listen. The sea was calm when dawn broke over the Sunda Strait on August 26, 1883. Fishermen slid their boats into the water, their nets ready, their minds on the daily rhythm of tides and winds. On the island of Java, children played outside, kicking balls of woven rattan across dusty courtyards. On Sumatra, markets filled with the scent of spices and the murmur of trading voices. Life went on as if the mountain that stood between them was only a restless neighbour, noisy but harmless. Yet beneath Krakatoa's dark slopes, pressure was building like a locked door, straining against its hinges. The mountain was no longer whispering, it was preparing to roar. By mid-morning, the first great explosion shattered the quiet. Witnesses later described it as if the sky itself had split in two. A booming crack echoed across the water, shaking windows in towns more than 50 miles away. In Batavia, people looked up from their breakfast tables, startled by the sound. Some thought it was artillery. Others believed an earthquake had struck. But it was neither. It was Krakatoa clearing its throat, announcing itself to the world. From the island's central vent, a column of ash burst upward with such force that it pierced the sky like a spear. Sailors in the strait watched in awe as the cloud climbed higher and higher, swelling outward like a vast mushroom. Lightning flashed within the darkness, followed by rolling thunder that blended with the mountain's own voice. The air vibrated as though giant drums were being beaten above the sea. Birds scattered, their cries lost in the roar. All through that day, Krakatoa erupted again and again. Each blast sent shockwaves across the strait, tossing ships on uneasy waves. Ash fell so heavily that captains ordered men to sweep their decks constantly, or the weight might capsize their vessels. Pumice stones, some the size of fists, rained down into the water, bobbing like grey corks. For miles around, the sea seemed alive with floating rock, an eerie sight for sailors who struggled to steer their ships through the drifting fields. On the coasts, people gathered outside their homes, staring at the sky. The sun dimmed as the ash clouds spread, turning daylight into a strange twilight. Villages that had been bright with morning suddenly lay in shadow. The air smelled sharp and bitter, filled with sulphur and smoke. In some towns, lanterns were lit at midday. Farmers guided their animals indoors, worried by the trembling ground. Mothers held their children close, whispering prayers. The sound of the eruptions rolled endlessly, like giant cannons firing one after another. That evening, the sky deepened into strange colours. Sunsets flared red and violet, painted by the fine ash that scattered light in the atmosphere. Some found the sight beautiful, a kind of terrible art. Others saw only danger. "The sky looks wounded," one villager was heard to say, staring at the blood-red horizon. Night brought no rest. Krakatoa's explosions grew stronger, rumbling through the darkness like the footsteps of unseen giants. Ships anchored miles away shook as if struck by invisible hammers. Sailors lay awake listening to the mountain thunder, their nerves tight as ropes pulled to breaking. On the island itself, the forests were gone, replaced by rivers of ash sliding into the sea. The once green slopes now glowed faintly with fire, as if the earth's bones were exposed. By dawn of August 27th, the stage was set for disaster. At 5:30 in the morning, Krakatoa unleashed a blast greater than all before. The explosion sent a column of ash 20 miles into the sky, higher than any cloud around it. The shockwave was so powerful that barometers in Batavia and Bittenzorg jumped like startled hearts. Villagers on the coasts fell to their knees, covering their ears as the sound battered them. Some fainted, overcome by fear. But this was only the beginning. At 6:44 a.m., another explosion ripped through the island, louder and more violent. A huge section of the mountain's northern flank collapsed into the sea, sending waves racing outward. Fishermen on the water screamed as walls of water rose behind their boats, chasing them toward the shore. Entire villages along the strait were struck by sudden floods, their houses swept away in moments. Survivors clung to trees and rooftops as the sea swallowed everything in its path. At 10:02 a.m., the greatest eruption came. Witnesses would later call it the loudest sound ever heard by human ears. The blast tore Krakatoa apart. 2/3 of the island vanished in an instant, collapsed into the boiling sea. The explosion was heard 3,000 miles away. In Australia, in India, even on islands off the coast of Africa. Sailors on ships far from the Sunda Strait thought their boilers had burst. People in distant cities thought cannons were firing in some unknown war. The sound circled the planet 7 times, a roar of giants echoing through the air itself. The shockwave raced outward faster than the eye could follow. On the shores of Java and Sumatra, people felt the air slam into their bodies, knocking them off their feet. Windows shattered, walls cracked, and trees bent like grass before the wind. The sea rose again, higher than before, climbing into tsunamis taller than coconut palms. These waves struck the coasts with unimaginable force, sweeping away tens of thousands of lives in minutes. Boats were lifted like toys and hurled inland, where they landed on rooftops or in rice fields. Villages disappeared beneath the foam. Those who survived described scenes of terror. Fathers carried children on their shoulders, running from waves that moved faster than a galloping horse. Mothers clutched infants to their chests, crying out as water surged around them. Entire families were swallowed by the sea, their voices lost in the thunder of waves and the roar of the volcano. The air grew black with ash, darker than the deepest night. People lit lanterns but could see nothing beyond arm's length. The ground shook without pause, as if the earth itself was breaking apart. In Batavia, nearly 100 miles away, the city was thrown into chaos. The sky turned dark at midday. Ash fell in thick curtains covering rooftops and streets. Church bells rang as the shockwaves passed, swinging wildly without hands to pull them. People fled from buildings, fearing they would collapse. Horses bolted, terrified by the constant booming. In the harbour, ships strained against their moorings, pulled by waves that rose and fell like mountains. Even farther away, strange effects were recorded. In Calcutta, nearly 2,000 miles from Krakatoa, the sound of the blast was mistaken for distant gunfire. On the island of Rodriguez in the Indian Ocean, more than 3,000 miles away, people wrote in astonishment about hearing a dull roar across the sea. It was as though the earth itself had found a single, terrible note and played it loud enough for the whole world to hear. The sky over the Sunda Strait was unlike anything seen before. The ash cloud rose more than 50 miles high, spreading outward in a vast canopy. Lightning crackled through the darkness, forks of light stabbing across the sky. Thunder rolled endlessly, blending with the mountain's voice until the two were indistinguishable. The air was thick with pumice and ash, falling in showers that covered the sea in grey rafts. Ships hundreds of miles away reported decks buried in ash inches deep. Sailors coughed and choked, their lungs burning from the sulphurous air. For hours the eruption continued, each blast a hammer blow against the earth. By afternoon, waves of hot gas and ash swept across the water, racing outward at hundreds of miles an hour. These pyroclastic surges skimmed the surface of the sea, destroying everything in their path. On the coast of Sumatra, villages were incinerated in seconds. People who had survived the earlier tsunamis now faced walls of fire. The surges left nothing but lands and ash in their wake. By evening of August 27th, Krakatoa was broken. Where once 3 great peaks had stood, only fragments remained. The central caldera had collapsed into the sea, leaving a vast hole nearly 4 miles across. The island that had roared like a giant was gone, drowned beneath the waves it had created. But its voice did not fade. For days afterward, the air carried the echoes of its final creak, the rolling thunder that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sun, hidden behind ash, struggled to shine. The world lay in twilight even at midday. Ash drifted high into the stratosphere, carried by winds that circled the globe. The eruption had ended, but its mark was only beginning. The roar of giants would echo not just across seas and skies, but through time itself, a reminder of the day when the earth spoke louder than ever before. The day the sky turned black. The morning of August 27th had been torn apart by thunder and fire, yet as the day stretched onward, an even stranger silence began to settle. The greatest explosions had passed, leaving only echoes and the steady fall of ash. But the silence was not peace. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the weight of something unnatural. All across the Sunda Strait, people looked upward and saw what seemed impossible. The sky itself had turned black. At first it looked like a storm, the kind of dark cloud that rolls in before a monsoon. But this was no storm. It did not move with the wind, did not scatter, did not fade. Instead, it thickened, climbing higher and wider, swallowing the horizon in every direction. The ash cloud from Krakatoa towered into the stratosphere, stretching 50 miles into the air and spreading outward like a shroud. Sunlight, once brilliant and hot in the tropics, struggled to pierce the veil. By midday, villages along Java and Sumatra lay in darkness as deep as midnight. Lanterns were lit, yet their glow could not push back the gloom. For those who lived beneath it, the darkness was terrifying. People had known volcanoes before, they had seen smoke and ash, But never had day turned fully to night. Children clung to their parents, asking why the sun had gone away. Old men whispered of omens, of punishment sent from the gods. Mothers gathered their families close, trying to light fires, though sparks barely flickered against the choking air. Even animals panicked. Chickens roosted as though night had fallen. Dogs whined and hid. Cattle refused to move, their eyes wide with fear. The air grew thick with falling ash, soft and grey at first, then heavier, clumping together into black rain. Rooftops sagged under the weight. Paths disappeared beneath layers of powder that rose higher with every hour. In some villages, people tied cloth over their mouths, coughing as they tried to breathe. Water jars turned dull, filled with grit and sulphur. Wells ran black. Food spoiled as ash settled into baskets and bowls. Everywhere there was dust on skin, in hair, between teeth. It clung to life like an unwelcome shadow. Out at sea, ships fought their way through an ocean that no longer looked blue. The surface was carpeted with pumice, rafts of stone floating for miles, drifting together until they seemed like islands of ash. Sailors leaned over their rails and scooped handfuls from the water, astonished at the rocks that floated like wood. Yet their amazement quickly turned to dread. The pumice clogged rudders and anchors, slowing ships until they drifted helplessly. And above them, the sky gave no guidance. The sun was gone and the stars hidden. Compass needles trembled, disturbed by the obscene forces. The world felt unmoored, as if sea and sky had broken their ancient pact. In Batavia, the capital of the Dutch East Indies, confusion ruled. Darkness fell at noon. Ash sifted into the city, covering cobblestones and rooftops. Gas lamps burned all day, their faint light swallowed by the gloom. Bells tolled as shockwaves passed, swaying in church towers without hands to touch them. People filled the streets, their faces grey with dust, their voices hushed. "The end has come," some whispered, their eyes wide with terror. Clergy led prayers, their words rising into the black air. Shops closed, markets fell silent, and the city seemed to hold its breath. In smaller villages along the strait, there was no time for prayer. Waves still surged inland, washing away whatever the ash had not buried. Survivors clung to trees or rooftops, watching helplessly as darkness swallowed the sea. Lanterns flickered, but the smoke of burning debris joined the ash, thickening the air until breathing became painful. Some cried out for help, their voices lost in the roar of distant waves. Others sat in stunned silence, unable to grasp what had happened. As the day passed, the blackness deepened. No light broke through, not even at the edges of the horizon. To those trapped within it, time itself seemed broken. Was it noon or night? Was it one day or two? The hours blended together in endless shadow. Fear grew heavier than ash. People could not see the faces of their loved ones unless they touched them. They could not walk a path without stumbling. It was as if the world itself had ended, leaving only a shell of darkness. Yet this darkness was not confined to the islands. High above, winds carried ash and gases across the globe. Within days, skies thousands of miles away glowed red at sunset. In London, strange twilights would soon be recorded. In New York, artists would paint skies streaked with brilliant violet and crimson. But in the Sunda Strait there was no beauty, only suffocation, only despair. On the morning of August 28th, the blackness remained. Villagers stepped outside their huts and saw nothing but this shadow. The air was colder than before, damp and heavy. Fine ash coated every surface, rising in little puffs with each step. Fields of rice and sugarcane lay ruined, their stalks broken beneath the weight. Rivers clogged with floating pumice and trees torn from their roots. In places where the tsunami had struck, there was nothing left, No houses, no people, only wreckage drifting in the ash-filled sea. Travellers who later passed through the region described it as otherworldly. One sailor wrote that it felt as though he had stepped onto the moon, grey, silent, lifeless. Another said the silence after each eruption was worse than the roar, because it was filled with dread, like waiting for the next hammer to fall. Even the birds were gone. The forest that had once echoed with their calls now stood mute, their branches bare. The black skies lasted for days, refusing to yield. Only on the fourth day did the sun begin to pierce through, a weak red disk struggling against the haze. When light finally returned, it revealed a landscape changed forever. Krakatoa itself was gone, ripped apart, drowned beneath the waves. The sea where the island had once risen was now a boiling caldera, steaming and broken. Coastlines that had been green with villages were flattened into wastelands. And where tens of thousands of lives had bustled only days before, silence now reigned. But the story of the black skies did not end there. The ashen gases thrown high into the atmosphere drifted far beyond Java and Sumatra. They circled the world, scattering light in strange ways. For months and even years afterward, people across the globe would witness sunsets so vivid they seemed unreal. Painters tried to capture the colours, their skies glowing with fiery reds and deep purples. Some thought the heavens were aflame. Scientists began to measure the cooling of the planet, noting how harvests failed and winters grew harsh. The day the sky turned black over Krakatoa would leave its fingerprint on every corner of the earth. For those who lived through it, though, memory was not of beauty, but of fear. Survivors told their children of days when no sun shone, when darkness reigned without stars, when the world seemed to end in ash. Some spoke in whispers, afraid the mountain might hear them and wake again. Others fell silent, unable to speak of what they had endured. The black skies became a wound in memory, an unspoken shadow carried from generation to generation. The day the sky turned black was not just a day in history. It was a reminder of how small human life is before the power of the earth. It was the voice of fire and stone speaking louder than nations, louder than wars, louder than prayer. And though the darkness eventually lifted, its lesson remained, carved into the memory of all who saw it, that the earth can hide the sun, that day can become night, and that sometimes the sky itself can fall, the sea that rose like a mountain. Long before Krakatoa roared, people of Java and Sumatra had always lived with the sea. It was their neighbour, their road, their harvest, their comfort. They built their homes along its edge, casting nets into its waters, trusting its tides the way they trusted the rising of the sun. The ocean was strong, yes, but it was also generous. To the people, the sea was family. But on the days when Krakatoa tore itself apart, that family turned into something wild and merciless. The ocean rose like a mountain, and in its fury, it swept away nearly everything in its path. The first waves came in the early hours when the eruptions began to deepen. Villagers standing on the shore felt the ground shake beneath their feet. They heard the thunder of the volcano, and then they saw the water pull back from the beaches. Fish flopped on the sand, boats tipped and cracked against the earth, and children pointed in confusion. Why is the sea running away? Some asked. Few knew the answer. Fewer still had time to act, because after the water fled, it came back as a wall. At first it was only a swell, tall but not impossible. Houses near the beach were splintered and carried inland. Animals swept into the surf. People ran toward the hills, calling for their families. The wave crashed through rice paddies, rolling up the land until it lost strength. Survivors looked back with wide eyes, trembling, but thankful to still be alive. They thought perhaps the worst had passed, but the sea was only beginning to show its strength. When the great eruption tore away most of Krakatoa's body on the morning of August 27th, The collapse sent unimaginable volumes of water racing outward. The ocean floor shifted, the caldera sank, and the sea surged as if the earth itself had exhaled. What rose was no ordinary tide. Witnesses later said it looked like the very back of the sea had lifted up, forming a ridge taller than trees, taller than houses, as if an invisible hand had pushed a mountain of water toward the land. On Java's coast, whole villages vanished in seconds. Waves 30 to 40 meters high, higher than a 10-story building, crashed against the land. Wooden houses shattered like matchsticks. Palm trees bent and snapped, carried inland like arrows. Boats were tossed into the air and thrown onto rooftops, where they stayed, marooned far from the sea. The water roared through fields, sweeping buffalo and carts and families alike. Those who tried to cling to trees were torn loose by the force. Those who ran found the water faster than their legs. On Sumatra, the story was the same. Villages that had stood for centuries disappeared beneath walls of foam and wreckage. Markets and temples, places of laughter and worship, were wiped clean as though they had never existed. Survivors clung to whatever floated, doors, barrels, palm trunks, crying out into the darkness as wave after wave rolled over them. Mothers screamed for children torn from their arms. Fathers dove into the churning water, desperate to pull loved ones to safety, often vanishing themselves in the attempt. One of the strangest sights came from ships in the strait. Captains who survived later described waves as high as mountains, racing across the water with a speed they had never seen. Some ships were lifted like feathers and carried far inland before crashing down. Others were overturned, their masts snapping, their crews lost in the foam. One Dutch warship, the Baru, was hurled more than a mile inland, landing upright in a forest, its anchor tangled in tree roots. There it sat for years, a monument to the sea's fury. The waves did not come once and stop. They came in a series, each seeming taller than the last. Some struck with the sound of thunder, slamming into cliffs and exploding upward into sprays higher than the tallest coconut palms. Others rolled silently across the land, carrying with them whole forests of debris. Fires broke out where oil lamps had been knocked into the flood, their flames hissing and vanishing beneath the waves. Villages that had survived the first surge were crushed by the second, then the third. The darkness made the terror worse. Under the blackened sky, no one could see how close the next wall of water was until it was already upon them. Survivors later said the sound of the waves was even more frightening than the sight, like 100 trains roaring together, like the voice of some giant beast devouring the world. People who could not see where to run listened in horror as the sea thundered toward them, the ground trembling with its approach. In some places, entire communities vanished so completely that no trace remained. On the small islands near Krakatoa, waves swept across the land from both sides, meeting in the middle and drowning everything between. Coral reefs were ripped from the seabed and thrown onto the shore. Sandbars disappeared overnight, reshaped by currents into unfamiliar patterns. The very map of the Sunda Strait was redrawn by water and fire. For those who lived far inland, the terror came later. Rivers swelled without warning, carrying wreckage from villages that no longer existed. Families waiting for news of loved ones found only fragments. Broken boats, torn clothing, drifting bodies washed miles from the sea. Survivors spoke of nights spent clinging to the tops of trees, hearing only the rush of water below and the cries of others carried away by the flood. The death toll grew with every passing wave. Tens of thousands perished in minutes, their lives swept away by forces too vast to comprehend. Yet even in the face of such devastation, stories of survival emerged. A mother in Java carried her child on her back, running uphill as the water rose, tripping but never letting go, reaching safety as the wave broke behind her. A fisherman clung to a piece of his shattered boat, drifting for days among pumice rafts before being rescued by a passing ship. Whole families survived by chance, finding high ground just before the waves reached their village. When the water finally receded, the world it left behind was unrecognizable. Where once there had been homes, there were only mud flats. Where markets had bustled, there were only broken timbers and scattered belongings. Beaches were buried beneath layers of sand and pumice. In some places, the coastline had shifted miles inland. In others, the sea had claimed whole stretches of land, leaving nothing but open water. In Batavia, news travelled slowly, but fear spread quickly. Messages arrived of entire districts swept clean, of thousands missing, of ships stranded in the forests. Officials tried to count the dead, but the numbers rose too fast. Survivors staggered into towns with stories so terrifying that listeners wept. No one could grasp the scale of what had happened. It was not just a storm, not just an earthquake. It was something beyond human measure. Yet the sea's reach did not stop at Java and Sumatra. Tsunamis from Krakatoa travelled across the Indian Ocean, touching distant shores. In Sri Lanka, harbours rose and fell with strange swells. In India, ships rocked violently against their docks. Even in South Africa, half a world away, the sea rose and fell as the waves completed their journey. The ocean had carried Krakatoa's fury to the edges of the earth. In the weeks that followed, the survivors faced a new struggle. Wells were poisoned with salt water. Farmland lay buried under sand and ash. Food grew scarce and disease spread quickly in the crowded camps where families huddled together. Grief hung heavy in the air. Every person had lost someone, a father, a mother, a child, a friend. The sound of waves haunted their dreams. The sea, once trusted, now seemed like a stranger with a hidden blade. But time moved forward, even through sorrow. The ocean, which had risen like a mountain, began to calm. Its surface smoothed, its tides returned. Fishermen slowly went back to their boats, their hands trembling as they pushed out onto waters that had betrayed them. Farmers cleared the fields, planting again in soil mixed with ash and salt. Life, fragile as it was, reached for the future. Yet the memory of those waves never left. It lingered in every story told by the fireside, in every prayer whispered before casting a net, in every cautious glance at the horizon. The sea had shown its true power, a power as old as the earth itself. On that day, it was not a path or a neighbour or a harvest. It was a mountain that moved, a wall that crushed, a voice that roared with the volcano. And for those who lived to tell the tale, it was proof that even the mightiest land and the deepest water are only pieces of the same restless earth, capable of rising together in fury when the balance breaks. The air that broke the world. The day the mountain shattered itself, the sound travelled farther than anyone could have imagined. It was not the low rumble of thunder, not the groan of ordinary storms, but a noise so immense that the air itself seemed to vibrate. People on the coasts of Java and Sumatra could barely stand upright when the first blasts rolled through, and far beyond, in cities and islands hundreds and even thousands of miles away, ears rang and windows shook. That roar was the voice of the earth, a sound so powerful it broke through the world itself. The air carried it like a living thing. It rippled outward, moving faster than sound should ever move. A shockwave that slammed against hills and shores, forests and fields. Windows battered violently in Batavia. Bells swung wildly, unmanned, ringing in time with the pulse of Krakatoa. People fled into streets, their hearts beating as though in unison with the explosion. Dogs barked and wailed. Horses panicked. Chickens ran, feathers bristling, seeking shelter in trees that were shaking as much as the ground beneath them. The sound had no mercy, no pause. It filled the sky, filled the land, filled every space where human ears and minds tried to hold it. Ships in the strait felt the roar like a physical strike. Timber cracked, sails tore, and men clutched rails as the shockwave passed. Some ships reported seeing waves rise high before they could hear the thunder. A terrifying reminder that air and sea were working together in Krakatoa's fury. Sailors compared the sound to the simultaneous firing of thousands of cannons, each echoing through the sky and sea until it was impossible to tell from where it came. The roar was both everywhere and nowhere, filling space in a way that made breathing feel heavy and eyes water. Survivors on land described the air as thick, not just with sound but with ash and heat. Each blast was accompanied by falling pumice, sulfur, and smoke. Breathing became difficult. Lungs burned. People coughed and stumbled trying to find shelter or higher ground. Trees bent under the pressure of the waves of air, their roots pulling free from the soil. Animals panicked, fleeing to hillsides or climbing anything that could keep them from being crushed by the invisible force. It was a roar that demanded attention, respect, and fear. The most remarkable part was that this sound did not stop at the Sunda Strait. It travelled across the ocean, circling the globe in ways people had never experienced before. In Australia, more than 3,000 miles away, people reported the morning sky trembling with distant thunder. In India, hundreds of miles inland, villagers thought artillery had fired from unseen forts. Even in the distant islands of the Indian Ocean, people recorded the sound as a rolling, terrifying vibration that came without warning. For some, it seemed as if the world itself had grown angry. In Batavia, the air after the explosion was heavy and strange. Ash drifted down even as people tried to breathe the wind. Windows, doors, and walls rattled from the force. For hours afterward, every deep rumble reminded citizens that Krakatoa had not finished speaking. Every puff of wind carried traces of ash and sulfur, the scent of the mountain's anger still strong. Families huddled together, listening to the shaking walls and the cries of the animals outside. People who had grown up near volcanoes had never heard anything like it. Scientists later measured the phenomenon, realizing that Krakatoa's explosion had produced a sound of incredible magnitude. Pressure waves travelled thousands of miles, repeated multiple times around the Earth. Barometers jumped with each pulse. Observatories recorded disturbances that no ordinary earthquake could explain. The eruption had turned the air into an instrument, playing a note so deep and so powerful that it circled the globe, passing over oceans, mountains, and cities. In some accounts, the sound was described as deafening, inescapable, yet paradoxically distant. People could feel it in their bones before they heard it fully. The ground seemed to shiver as the waves passed. Windows shattered without warning. Walls cracked. Bells rang in time with the pulse. Some people were knocked down. Some fainted. In all cases, the effect was terrifying and overwhelming. The air itself had been broken, reshaped into a force capable of affecting thousands of miles. The sound also left an emotional mark. Survivors spoke of panic and despair, of the feeling that the world had suddenly become too large, too alive, too uncontrollable. People who had lived through smaller eruptions were stunned into silence. Parents clutched children, siblings held each other, and villagers prayed in ways they had never done before. This was no ordinary natural disaster. It was a demonstration of the Earth's power made audible, a voice that demanded recognition. Even after the roar subsided, its echoes continued. For hours, the tremors rolled through the atmosphere, shaking ships, rattling houses, and keeping people awake. At night, the sky glowed red with the reflection of volcanic fires. Ash continued to fall, pumice floated on the water. The oceans were restless. The wind carried the smell of sulfur and heat across coasts and islands. People learned quickly that the eruption's power was not confined to the rocks, the waves, or the lava. It was in the air itself, travelling faster and farther than any person could outrun. By the next morning, a thin, eerie silence settled across much of the Sunda Strait. The worst of the blasts had passed, but the air remained heavy. Ash hung in clouds that blocked the sun, casting a strange twilight even at midday. Birds had disappeared. Forests were charred or buried under pumice. Rivers flowed sluggishly, clogged with debris, and everywhere the smell of sulphur lingered, a constant reminder of the volcano's invisible roar. In the following days, scientists and explorers documented the effects on the atmosphere. The eruption had thrown massive amounts of ash and gas into the stratosphere, creating sunsets that glowed red and purple for months. Air pressure fluctuated unpredictably. Temperatures dropped slightly in some regions as sunlight was blocked. Krakatoa had not only broken the land and sea, it had altered the air, changed the climate, and left a mark on the world's weather that would be felt long after the screams of the tsunami faded. Survivors wrote in diaries and letters about what it was like to live through that voice. They described the vibration in their bones, the choking air, the fear that the world was ending. They spoke of nights where the roar seemed to come from above, below, and all around, a sound that no words could truly capture. For them, the air had become a living, terrifying witness, carrying the story of the volcano in every breath. Krakatoa's roar had turned the sky into an instrument, the air into a messenger, and the world into a listener. Its sound circled the globe, teaching humanity that the Earth's voice could be louder than kings, louder than armies, louder than civilization itself. And even as centuries passed, scientists still measured traces of that sound in the atmosphere, a reminder that Krakatoa's voice had once broken the air and made the world tremble. The world. But in ash. After the roaring of Krakatoa and the mountain-high waves had passed, the world seemed to exhale. Yet it was not relief that followed. It was a strange, lingering shadow carried not on wind or sea, but in the very air itself. Ash from the eruption had climbed miles into the sky, drifting into the stratosphere where strong currents could carry it across oceans and continents. The fine grey powder spread slowly but inexorably, turning skies into veils and sunlight into faint glimmers. It was a quiet kind of power, subtle but relentless, and for many, it was almost invisible at first. In Java and Sumatra, where the worst had already struck, the ash settled in layers over the land. Streets were coated in grey powder. Roofs and walls were blanketed in dust. Rivers carried streaks of grey foam, rivers that had once glittered blue in the tropical sun. Farmers brushed ash from rice paddies and found seedlings crushed beneath its weight. Livestock trudged through fields of grey, their hooves sinking into mud mixed with pumice. The air was heavy and bitter, full of the sulphurous scent of fire and stone. Every breath was thick and sharp, a reminder that life had changed overnight. Even towns and cities further away were not spared. In Batavia, ash floated down like slow snow. People walked through streets with scarves over their mouths, coughing, eyes watering. Lanterns burned in broad daylight because the sun had become weak and red, filtered through layers of volcanic dust. Shops and markets closed, not because they were damaged, but because the air made it almost impossible to work. People huddled indoors, staring through grey windows, unsure what to do next. The ash was not merely a nuisance, it poisoned water sources, filled wells with grit, and coated plants to the point they could no longer grow. Food spoiled quickly when dust seeped into baskets and containers. In villages, families scavenged what remained, careful to pick through rice, vegetables and fruits coated in fine grey powder. Children coughed as they played, and elders wrapped their faces in cloth to avoid the sting in their throats. Even after days, the air felt heavy, as if the world itself had grown old and dusty. Fishermen who survived the tsunamis found the ocean strange and unfamiliar. pumice drifted across the water in thick rafts, sometimes miles wide. Nets snagged on floating stones, making it almost impossible to catch fish. Fish themselves had been poisoned by hot gases from the eruption, or had fled to calmer waters, leaving only the largest or hardiest behind. The sea, which had once provided life and sustenance, had been transformed into a grey, floating landscape of ash, stone and ruin. But Krakatoa's reach went far beyond the islands. Winds carried the fine ash high above the equator, scattering it across the globe. In the days and weeks that followed, people in Europe saw sunsets of unimaginable colour. In London and Paris, artists painted skies streaked with violet, crimson and gold, skies that looked like fire had fallen from heaven. Scientists and observers took notes, puzzled by the strange hues. Clouds reflected light in unusual ways, giving the illusion of multiple suns or a sky perpetually on the edge of sunset. The air felt different everywhere, thinner and colder in places, warmer and heavy in others. In the Americas, travellers noticed that the sunset seemed longer, the nights more vivid. Native peoples in the Andes described skies that glowed red for hours, skies that seemed impossible, yet undeniable. The world had become a canvas for Krakatoa, its invisible hand painting colours that no human had imagined. Some thought it magical, others feared it, and all were reminded that the eruption was no longer confined to the islands. It had become global. Even months later, ash lingered. Snow in Europe turned reddish when the particles fell from the sky. Scientists noticed that temperatures dropped slightly worldwide. Crops failed in places far from the eruption. Harvests were poorer. Winters seemed colder, longer. It was as though the mountain had left a ghost on the air, an invisible blanket that touched everyone. People who had never seen the volcano still felt its effects, reminded that the earth was connected in ways both subtle and profound. In the villages of Java, survivors began rebuilding, but the ash made every step a challenge. Paths were difficult to follow, rivers clogged, fields barren. Every grain of dust reminded people of what had been lost. Houses had to be swept daily to remove the fine grey coat. Food had to be cleaned, water filtered as best as possible. Even as life returned, the memory of Krakatoa's fury lingered in every inhaled breath, in every step across ash-covered ground. The animals of the region struggled too. Birds that had survived the eruption found no food among the scorched forests. Cattle grazed on ash-covered grass, their stomachs adjusting painfully. Fish in rivers and coastal waters had moved or died, leaving predators hungry. Nature itself had to find a new rhythm, one shaped by ash and pumice, by changed landscapes and sun-blocked skies. Life adapted slowly, as it always does, but the shadow of Krakatoa remained present in every living thing. In the cities far from Indonesia, people had no idea what had caused the change in their skies. Sailors' logs, scientific journals and letters carried stories of the eruptions, but the images could not match the reality. The air had changed in ways no one could see clearly, yet its effects were undeniable. Sunlight was different, colours brighter and more vivid at sunrise and sunset. Air temperatures shifted slightly. Crops and plants behaved oddly. The world, unknowingly, had been touched by fire and stone thousands of miles away. By the winter of 1883, months after the eruption, the sky had not returned fully to normal. Ash still drifted on the wind. Sunlight remained faint and red. The world had become quieter, slower, shadowed. Scientists began to understand that Krakatoa's eruption was not just a local disaster. It had altered climate patterns, affected oceans, and changed the atmosphere itself. It was a reminder that the power of the earth could not be contained. A single mountain, one island, had left a mark felt around the globe. Survivors learned to live with it, though life was forever changed. Children who had grown up in darkness and ash told stories to the next generation. Parents warned their families to respect the sea, the sky, and the land. They spoke of clouds that hid the sun, waves taller than houses, and the roar that shook the world. Every time the wind carried fine dust across their homes, it was a reminder of Krakatoa's presence, of the day when ash fell like snow and the world had seemed smaller, quieter, and more fragile than anyone had imagined. And so, the air that had carried Krakatoa's voice across oceans also carried its lesson. The world was not simply a stage for human life. It was alive, restless, and capable of wonders and terrors beyond comprehension. Ash became a messenger, travelling silently yet unmistakably, reminding all who saw it, breathed it, and lived under it that Krakatoa's shadow had stretched far beyond the islands, touching every horizon. The aftermath and rebuilding. When the ash finally began to settle, and the air lost some of its bitter weight, the survivors of Krakatoa turned their eyes to the land. It was a land transformed beyond recognition. Homes had vanished, villages had been swept into the sea, and fields lay buried under layers of grey pumice and ash. Rivers ran sluggish, sometimes blocked entirely by debris, and the familiar patterns of hills and coasts had shifted. The earth itself had been reshaped, leaving only fragments of the world that had existed before. At first, there was only despair. Families huddled together in makeshift shelters, wrapped in blankets or scraps of cloth, or how to begin again. Children cried for parents who had not returned. Parents searched for children swept away by waves or buried by falling ash. Every path and familiar landmark had been covered or destroyed. The world felt alien, like a dream turned upside down, and people struggled to understand how to live within it. Yet the instinct to survive is strong. Slowly, hands began to clear paths through the ash. Villagers used what materials remained to construct temporary shelters. Roofs were propped with driftwood, walls patched with leaves and bamboo. They dug into fields to find soil beneath the layers of pumice and dust. Water was collected from rain and streams, filtered as best as they could. Life, fragile and tender, began to return to a world that had been shattered in moments. Even amidst destruction, moments of quiet beauty appeared. The sun, now filtering through thin layers of ash, cast a soft red light on the grey landscape. Trees that had survived the tsunami and fires slowly began to show green shoots. Birds that had hidden or flown away returned to the hills and mangroves, their calls small but steady reminders of life. Fish repopulated some rivers and coastal waters. Nature, as relentless as it is gentle, began its long process of healing, weaving life back into spaces where death had dominated for days. Rebuilding villages was a slow, painstaking process. Families scavenged wood from wrecked homes and boats. Roofs were patched, walls repaired, and bamboo fences set upright once more. Children helped gather food, while adults worked to create safety from the ruins. Old traditions guided them. Prayers at temples, offerings to the spirits, songs to calm the fear that lingered like a shadow. Every act, even simple sweeping or carrying water, was an act of defiance against the chaos that had threatened to swallow everything. Along the coasts, rebuilding was even more difficult. Beaches had shifted miles inland. Rivers had changed course. Some towns were gone entirely, their memory carried only in stories. New villages were often built on higher ground, safer from tsunamis, yet still close enough to the sea for fishing and trade. Life adapted. People learned which areas were less likely to flood, which hills offered shelter from falling ash, which trees could survive volcanic winds. They studied the scars of the land to guide their future. Trade and commerce also began again, though it was slow. Markets reopened where buildings remained standing or in temporary shelters. Merchants carried food, water and cloth to villages that had been cut off by debris. Ships returned to the coasts, navigating carefully through waters still dotted with floating pumice. Sailors learned to read the new currents, the changing tides, and the strange landscape that had replaced the familiar strait. The sea, once terrifying, became a path to survival, a route for food and connection once again. Families also faced grief alongside rebuilding. Funerals were conducted for those who had been recovered, though many were never found. Graves were dug in layers of ash, markers simple or improvised, a quiet testament to lives lost. Survivors shared stories of those who had vanished, and in the telling, created a collective memory of the disaster. Fear remained, but so did hope. Every repaired home, every replanted field, every returned child was proof that life could continue even after unimaginable loss. Nature too adjusted to the changed world. Forests slowly began to regrow. Seeds carried by wind or water sprouted in ash-enriched soil. Mangroves returned along coasts, providing shelter to fish and stabilizing beaches. Birds returned in small flocks, followed by larger groups. Even in the areas completely stripped by the tsunamis, the land learned to heal. Life found a rhythm, though it was slower and different, marked by the memory of fire, smoke, and waves that had risen like mountains. In Batavia and other cities farther from the eruption, the world had not been destroyed, but its shadow was present. Scientists and travellers documented the changes in weather, the strange red sunsets, the drop in temperatures. Farmers and fishermen noticed disruptions in rainfall, in tides, in crop cycles. Even in distant lands, Krakatoa's eruption had left an imprint, and people began to realize that the world was connected in ways too vast to see. The disaster had rewritten not just local landscapes, but also global patterns, and humans everywhere were reminded of nature's reach. Rebuilding also required resilience of spirit. Children who had hidden from waves and roared with fear at explosions learned to laugh again. Villagers sang songs while clearing ash, telling stories while carrying water, and planting rice with careful hands. There was grief always, but there was also gratitude, for life, for family, for the slow return of the sun. Each day was a test of courage, each small success a victory over the memory of fire, water and thunder. Governments and officials worked slowly to assist. Supplies were brought in by ship, though many villages were unreachable. Doctors treated injuries and illnesses caused by ash and contaminated water. Food was distributed, though scarcity remained. The rebuilding of schools, temples and markets became priorities. Even as life returned, there was awareness that the earth could still be unpredictable. Krakatoa had taught humanity a lesson that no manual or rule could capture. Survival required attention, care, and respect for the immense power beneath their feet. By the end of 1883, months after the eruption, a fragile normalcy returned. Houses stood upright, crops grew cautiously in ash-enriched soil, roads were cleared of debris, rivers flowed again, though with new paths. People travelled farther to reach family and neighbours. Though grief lingered, hope persisted. The world was not the same, but it was alive, and that fact gave strength. Survivors often looked at the horizon and remembered the mountain that had roared, the waves that had crushed, the air that had broken the world, and then smiled faintly at the beauty of the sun returning once more. The rebuilding was more than physical. It was emotional and spiritual, a reclaiming of confidence and courage. Communities gathered to pray, to honour the dead, to celebrate the resilience that had carried them through the unimaginable. Schools and temples, when rebuilt, became symbols not only of faith but of determination. Every child who walked safely across cleared fields, every adult who planted new rice shoots, was a testament to life's persistence. Nature and humanity together showed how recovery is slow but unstoppable. Trees regrew among ruined houses. Fish returned to the coasts. Mangroves stabilized beaches. Birds nested again. Human laughter returned to markets and homes. Ash that had once suffocated now became soil, fertile in its own way, nurturing a new generation of life. Krakatoa's destruction had been total, but life has a stubborn way of reclaiming itself, and so the aftermath was not just ruin, not just grief. It was also the beginning of something new. The island of Krakatoa itself would someday rise again from the sea, slowly forming new land and new peaks. Communities would continue to adapt, learn and thrive. The world had been tested, its limits revealed, yet humanity and nature endured. Every rebuilt home, every replanted field, every return of a bird or fish was a quiet triumph over the fury that had once reshaped the world. The volcano reborn years passed after Krakatoa's cataclysm, and the world began to settle into a fragile calm. The black skies had lifted, the tsunamis had receded, and the ash-covered lands had been slowly reclaimed by human hands and nature's own quiet persistence. But deep beneath the ocean, the story of the volcano was not over. While people rebuilt villages and cleared fields, the earth itself was already stirring. Beneath the waves, molten rock churned, pushing slowly upward, building a foundation for what would one day become a new island. Krakatoa's spirit, though shattered, had not gone. Fishermen and sailors first noticed small signs. In calm waters near the original site, the sea seemed different, warmer, bubbling in patches, carrying the smell of sulphur on the wind. Floating pumice returned, though far less than before, forming thin rafts that drifted slowly across the ocean. Waves lapped strangely at their boats, as if the ocean knew something new was forming beneath. Some told stories of feeling the water tremble beneath their feet. Small shifts at first, barely perceptible, but enough to remind them that Krakatoa had not fully rested. Scientists and explorers grew curious. They sailed to the submerged caldera, taking careful measurements of water temperature, depth, and chemical composition. They discovered that the volcano's magma chamber was still active, feeding heat and pressure into the sea. Sulphurous gases bubbled to the surface, hinting at the energy still contained beneath the waves. The earth, it seemed, was preparing to speak again, though softly at first, a gentle murmur before the next voice of fire. Then gradually the first hints of new land appeared. At first it was nothing more than tiny black rocks breaking the surface during low tide, too small to walk on, easily swallowed by waves. Sailors laughed nervously at these early signs, unsure if it was a permanent change or just floating debris. But over months and years, these rocks grew larger, forming small islets, the first visible hints of a new volcanic peak. Life, which had been extinguished on the old Krakatoa, had nowhere to return yet, but the foundation was laid for a new beginning. By the early 20th century, a proper island had begun to emerge. Steam rose constantly from its surface as magma met seawater, creating clouds of vapour that drifted across the horizon. The sound of bubbling water hissing and snapping against rocks marked the slow birth of the volcano's new form. Each eruption was small but steady, tiny bursts compared to the fury of 1883, yet still enough to remind sailors that Krakatoa had not forgotten how to roar. Birds were among the first visitors to this newborn land. Seabirds circled overhead, inspecting the blackened rock. Some dared to land, seeking insects or resting spots. Their presence brought the first signs of life to a landscape that had been barren beneath the waves. Seeds carried by wind and water from nearby islands began to settle into crevices. Algae and small plants took root in the thin layers of ash and pumice, slowly softening the hard surfaces of new land. Nature, resilient and patient, reclaimed the volcano in its own quiet rhythm. Sailors and scientists who observed the island spoke of its strange beauty. Steam clouds created hazy sunrises, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. Black volcanic rock jutted sharply against the horizon, a reminder of fire and destruction, yet contrasted by the delicate life beginning to settle on its slopes. Waves lapped at its base with a gentle rhythm, and the smell of sulphur mingled with the salty sea breeze. It was a world both dangerous and wondrous, a living lesson in creation and destruction intertwined. By the 1920s and 1930s, the new volcano, now called Anak Krakatau, child of Krakatoa, had grown taller and more substantial. Steam vents puffed clouds constantly. Lava flows occasionally reached the sea, creating new beaches and reshaping the coastline. Geologists documented each eruption, noting the steady growth of land and the volcano's slow reclamation of power. It was smaller and quieter than its parent, but it carried the legacy of 1883, proof that life and energy beneath the surface could never be fully destroyed. Plant life began to flourish in pockets of the new island. Grasses, shrubs, and hardy pioneer species took root in the thin volcanic soil. Insects followed, arriving on wind currents or in driftwood, starting a food chain that would allow birds, lizards, and eventually other small animals to settle. Every green shoot, every fluttering bird was a reminder that Krakatoa's fury, once destructive, had created an opportunity for new life. What had been dead and black was becoming alive again. Human attention returned slowly. Sailors mapped the growing island. Researchers collected samples of rocks, gases, and plants. Cartographers added the new landmass to maps, noting its steady growth. Though dangerous, the island became a symbol of hope and resilience, proof that the Earth could recover, reinvent itself, and provide a stage for new stories, even after almost total annihilation. Local communities in Indonesia watched Anak Krakatau from a distance, remembering the tales of 1883. Elders spoke of the fury, the tsunamis, the black skies, and the ash that had travelled around the world. Children listened, wide-eyed, as parents told how the mountain had risen again. The new volcano was a living lesson, a reminder that nature's cycles of destruction and creation are inseparable. Fear remained, yes, but it was tempered by respect and wonder. Animals slowly colonized the island. Birds built nests. Crabs and insects found homes among rocks and ash. Plants stabilized loose soil, reducing erosion from rain and wind. Every living thing added strength to the fragile ecosystem, preparing it for the day when humans might tread carefully on its slopes. Anak Krakatau became a laboratory of life, where observation could reveal how species return to freshly formed land, and how ecosystems develop from scratch in the shadow of fire. Scientists marveled at the pace and the patience of nature. They noted how small eruptions contributed new soil, minerals, and heat, enriching the ecosystem. They studied how wind carried seeds, how birds helped disperse them, how insects followed to pollinate and feed. Each year the island grew taller, greener, more complex. The child of Krakatoa was becoming a teacher, showing that creation often follows destruction in the most quiet, persistent ways imaginable. The lessons of Anak Krakatau were not just for scientists. Fishermen learned new currents and hazards near the growing island. Sailors studied how waves interacted with fresh volcanic rock. Local people adapted, respecting the dangers while learning the benefits of newly formed beaches or fishing grounds. Krakatoa's rebirth reminded humanity that while destruction may dominate for a moment, life continues to reclaim its place slowly, quietly, unrelentingly young. By mid-century, the island had become substantial enough for more careful exploration. Expeditions documented the flora, fauna, and geology, noting the steady layering of lava and ash. Every eruption added new layers, altering the landscape slightly, but ensuring that the island was alive, growing, and learning its own lessons in fire and resilience. The world had watched the old Krakatoa destroy, and now watched as the new child began to create. Anak Krakatau remains today as a living monument, rising from the sea, ever-changing, a reminder that destruction is only part of nature's story. Life returns, sometimes slowly, sometimes unpredictably but inevitably. The volcano, once a source of terror and despair, now inspires awe and curiosity. It teaches that from fire, water, ash and stone the earth can renew itself. The child of Krakatoa is proof that life persists, that nature heals, and that even in the shadow of immense power, beauty and growth can emerge. Stories of survivors. In the months and years following Krakatoa's eruption, the air remained heavy with memory. Villagers, sailors and families who had survived told their stories in quiet tones, often near fires, sometimes in whispered conversations in the shadow of still recovering homes. Each story carried the weight of fear, the sudden terror of waves that rose like mountains, the ash that coated every breath, and the darkness that had turned day into night. These were not tales of heroics alone, but of human fragility, courage, and the strange, delicate miracle of survival. One woman in Java remembered running through streets covered in ash, holding her child tightly. Her husband had been swept away by the tsunami, and she had lost nearly everything she owned. Yet she found strength in the small arms clutching hers, in the warmth of a child alive amid so much loss. She spoke of the fear of turning corners, of seeing waves rise before her eyes, and of the silence after the roar when the world seemed to stop and hold its breath. That silence, she said, was almost worse than the eruption itself, because it reminded her how close life and death had been. A fisherman told of being tossed from his boat by the great waves. He clung to floating debris for hours, watching the sky darken with ash and the sun glow red in strange ways. He remembered the smell of sulphur, the taste of salt water, and the terrifying sounds that seemed to come from the earth itself. When he finally reached shore, he found his village gone, and yet he survived. He would spend the rest of his life telling others how small actions, a piece of driftwood, a careful grip, a prayer whispered quietly, had saved him. Children, too, carried vivid memories. One boy described the waves as enormous walls of moving water, higher than the coconut palms, crashing into houses and sweeping away animals. He spoke of his mother lifting him onto a roof, holding him as the water tore past. He remembered the roar in his ears, the ash that stung his eyes, and the silence afterward, when the earth felt still but empty. These children grew up with fear and wonder intertwined, learning early that life was precious, fleeting, and deeply fragile. Families who survived often described the strange ways they had been spared. Some were carried inland by floating debris, ending up in places they had never visited. Others found high ground just in time, climbing hills and trees while the water rose beneath them. Some survivors saw neighbours vanish in moments, while they themselves escaped by inches. These small acts of chance, of timing and location, were remembered as miracles. Yet they were also reminders that control is an illusion, and survival often depends on a mixture of courage, awareness, and pure luck. The elderly told stories differently, with quiet reflection. They spoke of life before Krakatoa, of routines and rhythms that the eruption shattered. Markets, temples, and homes vanished, leaving gaps not just in geography but in memory. The elderly remembered the first blackened sky, the waves that carried their friends and families, the days when ash fell as gently as snow, yet covered everything with grey despair. They spoke of rebuilding, of the long months when the land seemed hostile, and how communities slowly returned to life. Their stories were full of wisdom, caution, and reverence for the power of the earth. Sailors too shared experiences that mixed awe and terror. They spoke of floating amid pumice fields, drifting for days without food, seeing the outlines of a shattered island, and feeling the tremors of the new magma beneath the waves. Many ships had been tossed onto beaches or forests, strange monuments of the eruption. Crew members described clinging to spars and barrels, praying quietly, counting seconds between waves, and hearing the distant roar of a mountain that had swallowed whole islands. Their accounts carried technical details, but also the unmistakable emotional weight of confronting nature's might firsthand. Even people far from the Sunda Strait remembered the changes. Traders, explorers and observers in other parts of Asia, India and Australia noted unusual red skies, strange weather patterns, and reports from distant sailors. Letters arrived in Europe describing vivid sunsets, colder temperatures, and a sense that the world had shifted slightly, permanently under the influence of Krakatoa. Though these observers had not felt the tsunami or the roar, they were still part of the story linked by air, ash and waves that circled the globe. Amid the fear, there were moments of grace and resilience. Survivors recalled helping neighbours, sharing scarce food and rescuing others from debris. Communities gathered to rebuild homes, clear rivers, and plant crops in soil coated with ash. Every small act of cooperation was a quiet victory against the overwhelming scale of destruction. People learned quickly that survival required more than courage. It required community, trust, and the willingness to face the unknown together. The eruption also reshaped how people understood the world. Survivors spoke of listening to the sky and sea more carefully, noting changes in wind, tides and clouds. Farmers observed the ash's effect on soil, understanding which lands would grow crops and which remained too damaged. Sailors studied currents, waves and floating pumice, adapting their routes. In all cases, humans learned to read subtle signs from nature, a lesson in humility born from experience with overwhelming forces. In letters, diaries and oral stories, survivors described their emotions as much as events. Fear, despair, hope, relief and wonder all coexisted. They spoke of nights spent in darkness, huddled with loved ones, listening to distant rumbles or watching distant fires. They described the strange months after the tsunamis, when the world seemed paused, holding a breath that could have been death or life. These emotional landscapes were as vivid as the physical ones, marking memory and shaping the way communities rebuilt both homes and hearts. Children growing up after the eruption were taught both caution and curiosity. Parents warned them of signs of volcanic activity, taught them routes to higher ground, and encouraged respect for the sea and earth. At the same time, stories of survival inspired courage, empathy, and ingenuity. The eruption became a living memory, passed down through generations, a way to understand the fragility of life and the resilience required to endure it. Even decades later, survivors' tales were recorded by scientists and historians. Anthropologists noted how people remembered moments in precise detail, sometimes down to the feel of ash on skin or the smell of sulfur in the air. Psychologists observed the ways trauma and memory intertwined, shaping entire communities. Yet despite the horror, stories were not solely about fear. They were about perseverance, ingenuity, and the human capacity to reclaim life from disaster. Some survivors described miraculous coincidences. A mother's instinct to climb a tree saved her children. A fisherman's knowledge of currents allowed him to escape a deadly wave. Families who had been swept apart by the tsunamis found each other days later, guided by luck, hope, and determination. These accounts reminded listeners that life's survival often involves a combination of preparation, awareness, and unpredictable fortune. The collective memory of Krakatoa became part of the culture. Festivals, prayers, and rituals commemorated the lives lost and the resilience of the living. Temples were rebuilt, markets reopened, and children played on lands that had once been devastated. The stories told by survivors shaped local understanding of the world, nature, and human connection. They became lessons in patience, courage, and humility, handed down as both warning and inspiration. In the end, the survivors' stories were not only about the mountain, the waves, or the ash. They were about life itself. They taught how to endure, how to notice small signs in the environment, and how to work together in the face of overwhelming forces. They showed that even in moments of total destruction, humans could find ways to survive, rebuild, and ultimately thrive. The eruption of Krakatoa, terrifying and unstoppable, left a mark not only on the land and sea, but also in human hearts. It was remembered in whispers, songs, and daily life. Those who survived carried its lessons forward, sharing them with children, neighbours, and anyone who would listen. And in every story, no matter how small, the message remained clear. Life persists, courage matters, and even the most destructive forces can be faced with hope, community, and determination. The legacy of Krakatoa. Even years after the eruption, Krakatoa's story continued to ripple across the world. Its legacy was not only in the islands reshaped, the villages destroyed, or the lives lost, but in the way people, scientists, and nature itself were changed forever. Scholars wrote about the eruption in journals, sailors told tales at ports, and communities carried memories and quiet rituals, teaching the lessons of resilience, respect, and understanding of nature's immense power. Scientists marveled at the eruption's scale. Krakatoa had not just destroyed, it had sent waves of ash and sound around the globe. Barometers recorded pressure changes thousands of miles away. The sky glowed red and violet in Europe for months. Temperatures dropped slightly in distant regions. These were tangible signs that a single mountain, exploding in fury, could influence weather, climate, and life far beyond its home. Krakatoa became a case study in the interconnection of the Earth's systems, teaching humanity that local events could have global consequences. In Indonesia, the eruption became part of cultural memory. Villages commemorated the event with festivals, prayers, and storytelling. Songs were sung to remember the dead, and children were taught to respect both the land and sea. Elders told tales of tsunamis, ash clouds, and the blackened sky, emphasizing not only the danger, but also the bravery of those who survived. For generations, Krakatoa became a teacher, reminding people that life can be fragile yet resilient, and that understanding nature's cycles is essential for survival. The eruption also transformed the local ecosystem. Forests that had been destroyed slowly regrew. New plant species colonized pumice and ash fields, creating a fresh and unique habitat. Birds returned, insects followed, and small mammals cautiously explored the recovering land. Krakatoa's fury, once a force of complete devastation, had created conditions for new life. Scientists studying these patterns found lessons in ecological succession, observing how ecosystems can recover, adapt, and thrive even after near-total destruction. Anak Krakatau, the child of Krakatoa, became the living symbol of this legacy. Rising slowly from the ocean, it reminded everyone that destruction is not permanent. Life returns, lava flows created new land, ash enriched the soil, and small plants began to sprout, followed by insects and birds. The island was a laboratory of natural resilience, showing how ecosystems rebuild themselves. Observers saw how the cycles of fire and growth could coexist, and how nature's energy is never fully lost, only transformed. The global scientific community took notice. Krakatoa became a benchmark for studying volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, and atmospheric effects. Researchers documented ash dispersal, air pressure changes, and the impact on sunsets and climate. Meteorologists analysed how the eruption affected weather patterns for months. Oceanographers studied tsunamis and pumice drift. The eruption provided a rare and vivid example of how Earth's energy can shape not only local geography, but also the sky, sea, and atmosphere. Artists and writers were inspired too. The surreal skies, red sunsets, and strange light caused by volcanic ash influenced paintings, poetry, and literature. In Europe and America, artists captured the eerie beauty of skies touched by Krakatoa's ashes. Writers described sunsets that glowed longer, nights that seemed more vivid, and the subtle changes in light that followed the eruption. Even thousands of miles away, the volcano left an impression on human imagination, teaching that nature's power is both destructive and endlessly inspiring. In the years following the eruption, local communities adapted to the knowledge that volcanoes are alive. People learned to read signs in the sky, feel tremors beneath their feet, and watch the wind for the first hint of danger. Early warning systems, though primitive, began to develop from observation and oral tradition. Survivors became teachers, passing down crucial knowledge about safety, evacuation, and the ways in which humans could coexist with such an unpredictable planet. The eruption shaped not only the land, but human understanding itself. Krakatoa's tsunamis also left a lasting mark on human settlement. Communities rebuilt further from vulnerable coasts, planting mangroves and trees to buffer against future waves. Fishing practices changed, with boats and equipment adapted to shifting currents and floating pumice. The memory of waves towering higher than houses became a cautionary tale embedded in local culture. It was a reminder that survival required preparation, observation, and respect for forces beyond human control. The eruption influenced science in ways beyond volcanology. Meteorology, oceanography, and ecology all drew lessons from Krakatoa. Scientists could study how massive eruptions impact the climate, influence ocean currents, and affect global weather patterns. Krakatoa's ashes created vivid sunsets that inspired the study of light scattering in the atmosphere. The eruption was a living classroom, demonstrating the connections between fire, water, air, and life itself. Its legacy extended beyond destruction, shaping human curiosity and understanding for generations. For the people who lived near the Sunda Strait, Krakatoa became a symbol of endurance. Survivors told stories not to frighten, but to teach resilience. Children learned to respect the ocean's power, to observe subtle changes in the weather, and to help their communities recover from natural disasters. Traditions arose from both memory and necessity, creating a culture intertwined with the volcano, understanding its dangers and marveling at its creation. Every rebuilt house, every replanted field, every surviving child carried the lessons of 1883 into the future. Even the wider world felt Krakatoa's legacy. Reports of strange red skies and unusual weather were recorded as far away as Europe and North America. Artists painted the sunsets, scientists studied the ash, travelers shared accounts in letters and journals. Krakatoa became a global phenomenon, a reminder that one eruption could change the sky, the ocean, and the way humans perceive the planet. Its memory was both local and universal, a lesson in the immense reach of natural events. The eruption also highlighted human fragility and resilience. Losses were immense, villages gone, thousands of lives lost, but survival was possible. Communities adapted. Children grew up learning caution and courage. Families found ways to rebuild, to reclaim land, to survive waves and ash. Krakatoa's legacy was a balance of destruction and hope, teaching humans that while the earth can be terrifying, life continues if people respect it and support one another. And at Krakatoa continues this legacy today. It rises slowly from the sea, its eruption smaller but persistent, shaping new land, teaching new lessons. Scientists monitor its growth, studying lava flows, ash, and ecological succession. Birds and plants colonize it. Marine life returns to nearby waters. The child of Krakatoa is living proof that life follows destruction, that nature heals, and that the earth is constantly renewing itself. Its presence reminds people that the past informs the present, and that survival, curiosity, and respect are essential to understanding the world. Krakatoa's influence is both scientific and spiritual. It reminds humanity of the beauty, terror, and unpredictability of nature. It teaches that life, though fragile, is persistent, and that destruction can become creation. Its legacy touches the air, the sea, the land, and human culture. Survivors' stories, scientific studies, and natural regrowth all intertwine, creating a living memory of fire and water, ash and rebirth. And so, the world remembers Krakatoa not only for what it destroyed, but for what it created. Understanding, resilience, knowledge, and hope. From the roaring explosion to the quiet regrowth of Anak Krakatau, the volcano's story is a testament to the enduring connection between humans and the planet. Life continues, the Earth renews itself, and Krakatoa's lessons echo in every red sunset, every trembling wave, and every new sprout growing on volcanic soil. Krakatoa in the modern imagination. Krakatoa did not only live in the memory of those who saw it roar, it lived in the minds of people far beyond Indonesia, across oceans and generations. The eruption became a story that inspired artists, writers, scientists, and dreamers alike. The blackened skies, red sunsets, and enormous waves created images that would travel through time, reminding humanity that nature's power can be both terrifying and beautiful. Every brushstroke, every line of poetry, every scientific observation carried a piece of that eruption into the world. Writers imagined the fury of the volcano in novels and stories, describing how a mountain could roar louder than the seas, how ash could turn day into night, and how life could hang in delicate balance between survival and extinction. Krakatoa became a symbol of the sublime, the kind of awe-inspiring force that is both magnificent and humbling. Through words, people far from the islands could feel the fear, the wonder, and the delicate miracle of life persisting in the aftermath. Painters and artists were drawn to the strange skies left in Krakatoa's wake. Sunsets turned violet, crimson, and gold for months after the eruption, inspiring canvases filled with surreal colours. They captured the strange beauty of ash-filtered sunlight, the glowing horizon, and the calm seas reflecting the soft light. These artworks did not merely reproduce the scene, they interpreted it, showing how destruction could become a source of aesthetic wonder, and how the memory of terror could transform into a celebration of colour, light, and resilience. Scientists too were captivated. Krakatoa offered a unique opportunity to understand Earth's forces. Geologists studied the deposits of ash and pumice, tracking how volcanic material could reshape coastlines and islands. Meteorologists observed the global impact on climate and weather, noting how temperatures dropped slightly and sunsets glowed unusually across continents. Oceanographers traced tsunamis and floating pumice, learning how water could carry both life and destruction. Every eruption, observation, and experiment revealed more about the complex system connecting land, air, and sea. In schools and universities, Krakatoa became a story used to teach respect for nature. Students learned about the forces of tectonic plates, volcanic activity, and natural disasters, but also about human resilience. The eruption was not just a case study in destruction, it was a lesson in adaptation, community, and hope. Teachers shared survivor stories alongside scientific data, blending emotion with knowledge to create a holistic understanding of how humans interact with an unpredictable world. Krakatoa also influenced imagination beyond the arts and sciences. Philosophers, storytellers, and poets saw in its eruption a metaphor for the cycles of life. Destruction, they observed, can lead to creation. Death of one form of life allows new growth. Chaos can produce beauty. The eruption became a symbol of transformation, of how the world is constantly evolving, and how life can find ways to return even after total devastation. In modern media, Krakatoa inspired films, documentaries, and visual storytelling. Filmmakers recreated the eruption, showing mountains roaring, skies darkened with ash, and waves swallowing villages. Documentaries blended historical accounts, survivor stories, and scientific explanations to give viewers both fear and awe. allowing them to experience the scale of the disaster while appreciating the delicate resilience of life afterward. These stories continue to educate and inspire, showing that the legacy of Krakatoa is both cautionary and celebratory. Anak Krakatau, the child of the original volcano, became a central figure in these modern narratives. It reminded people that life and energy continue even after destruction. Scientists and artists documented its eruptions, growth, and gradual colonization by plants and animals. Children learned to connect the story of the child volcano to lessons about patience, resilience, and the natural cycles of creation and destruction. In this way, the legacy of Krakatoa continues to teach, not only about the past, but about the ongoing processes of the Earth. Across Indonesia, the volcano shaped cultural memory. Rituals, songs, and storytelling preserved lessons from 1883. Temples, rebuilt and strengthened, became places to remember those lost and to honour the power of nature. Communities held festivals marking the resilience of life, blending grief with gratitude. Krakatoa became more than an event. It became a teacher, a symbol, a presence that guided behaviour, culture, and understanding for generations. Tourists and adventurers who visited the region were drawn to both the history and the living volcano. They observed the blackened slopes, the vents emitting steam, and the signs of life returning. Guides told tales of ash clouds, tsunamis, and the roar that could be heard across islands. Travellers left with stories and memories, bridging the gap between local experience and global imagination. In this way, Krakatoa continues to connect people across time and space, inspiring curiosity, respect, and wonder. Scientific expeditions brought new discoveries that added layers to the story. Researchers documented new species colonizing the fresh lava, traced the movement of pumice across oceans, and studied the chemical changes in air and water. Each expedition revealed how the eruption shaped ecosystems, created opportunities for life, and influenced climate. Krakatoa's legacy, in this sense, is not only cultural and emotional, it is deeply scientific, a lesson in Earth systems, adaptation, and resilience. Even in education and literature, Krakatoa serves as a reminder that humans are part of a larger system. Children learn to understand volcanic activity, tsunamis, and ecological recovery not merely as facts, but as part of the story of life on Earth. Stories of survivors are paired with lessons in geology, meteorology, and ecology, helping students connect human experience with natural processes. Krakatoa teaches humility, curiosity, and respect for forces larger than ourselves. Artists continue to capture its beauty and terror. Paintings show ash clouds drifting across oceans, red sunsets illuminating villages, and waves towering higher than houses. Writers tell stories of courage, fear, and the quiet strength of survivors. Filmmakers recreate moments of awe and danger, blending history and imagination. Through these works, the eruption reaches new audiences, teaching that even in destruction there is learning, reflection, and sometimes unexpected beauty. Krakatoa also left lessons for disaster preparedness. Governments, scientists, and communities now study volcanoes and tsunamis to understand warning signs, evacuation procedures, and long-term recovery. The eruption demonstrated that even a single event can affect climates, economies, and lives across the globe. Its legacy informs modern planning, reminding humanity that vigilance, observation, and respect for natural processes are essential for survival. Across centuries, Krakatoa remains a symbol of cycles, destruction and creation, fear and awe, loss and growth. Its eruption reshaped the physical world and the human imagination alike. Anak Krakatau continues to rise, reminding everyone that life and energy never truly vanish. Each eruption, each new sprout of vegetation, each returning bird is a testament to resilience. The legacy is alive, teaching not just about the past, but about the ongoing rhythm of the planet, the persistence of life, and the beauty that can emerge from chaos. The eruption, its aftermath, and its modern echoes show how closely humans are connected to the Earth. Krakatoa shaped the land, influenced the skies, and even altered oceans. It affected human culture, art, science, and imagination. Its legacy is not frozen in the past. It continues to inspire understanding, curiosity, and reverence. Through every story, painting, research paper, and song, Krakatoa reminds us of the delicate balance between destruction and renewal and the infinite resilience of life itself. Reflections on Krakatoa. Krakatoa's story is not simply one of fire, waves, or ash. It is a story of life, of resilience, and of the delicate balance between humans and the forces of nature. Sitting quietly on the shores near the Sunda Strait, one can imagine the eruption as both terrifying and magnificent. A moment when the Earth reminded humanity of its power, and yet also of its patience. The mountain roared, the waves rose, the sky turned black, but life, as always, endured. Looking back, the eruption teaches that destruction is only part of the story. Villages were swept away, thousands lost their lives, and familiar landscapes disappeared. And yet, from that devastation, new land emerged. Communities rebuilt. Survivors carried stories of courage and hope. Flora and fauna recolonized the scorched islands. Anak Krakatau rose from the sea slowly, steadily, a child learning to grow in a world shaped by the parent that came before. Nature has a way of turning tragedy into opportunity, loss into renewal. Survivors' experiences remind us that courage often comes in quiet forms. A parent lifting a child above the waves, a neighbour sharing water and food, a sailor clinging to driftwood for hours. These are acts of heroism that rarely make the headlines, but shape the course of life. Through their stories, we see that resilience is not grand or spectacular. It is intimate, gentle, and persistent. It is the quiet choice to continue, to rebuild, to care for one another, even when everything has been lost. Krakatoa also teaches respect. The eruption was sudden and overwhelming, showing that humans are small in the face of the planet's energy. But it also shows that humans can adapt, observe, and learn. Farmers adjusted to new soil, sailors learned new currents, scientists measured the effects of ash and tsunamis, and communities rebuilt with care. Respect is both fear and understanding, the recognition that the Earth is alive, unpredictable, and endlessly creative. In this balance, humans find their place not as masters of nature, but as participants in its cycles. The ecological story of Krakatoa is equally remarkable. In just a few years, life returned to places that had seemed lifeless. Seeds carried by wind and water, animals moving through air, land and sea, all contributed to the rebirth of ecosystems. Birds nested on blackened rock, insects colonized new vegetation, and plants grew in nutrient-rich ash. Nature shows patience, teaching that recovery is often slow yet inevitable. Krakatoa's fury was not the end of life. It was part of life's ongoing rhythm, a reminder that creation often follows destruction. Modern science continues to study Krakatoa, learning lessons that extend far beyond the Sunda Strait. Its eruption provides insight into climate, ocean currents, volcanic activity, and ecological recovery. Anak Krakatau grows slowly, teaching how ecosystems develop from freshly formed land. Weather patterns respond to volcanic gases. Tsunamis generated in the past inform current disaster preparedness. Krakatoa's legacy is not frozen in time. It is alive in research, observation, and understanding, showing that even in catastrophe, knowledge can emerge. Cultural memory is another enduring thread. The eruption shapes stories, songs, prayers, and rituals in Indonesia. Survivors' narratives are passed to new generations, teaching both caution and courage. Artists and writers continue to depict the sky, the waves, and the ash in ways that celebrate resilience. Krakatoa becomes more than a physical presence. It is a symbol of endurance, curiosity, and the human capacity to survive and learn from extreme events. The child volcano Anak Krakatau rises as a living continuation of the story. Its eruptions are smaller, gentler, but steady. New plants take root, birds return, and the island continues to grow. Life persists, showing that the cycles of nature do not end with disaster. The child is proof that the earth is resilient, that energy transforms rather than disappears, and that growth follows destruction in ways both beautiful and subtle. Observers see in its slopes a lesson in patience and in the quiet strength of life. Krakatoa also teaches humility. The eruption reminds humanity that the planet operates on scales beyond comprehension, that energy beneath the surface can reshape continents, and that even small actions may be insignificant compared to the vast forces of fire, water, and air. Yet at the same time, it shows how humans can survive, adapt, and thrive when they respect these forces. Life continues, not because humans control nature, but because humans learn to live in harmony with it. The eruption also invites reflection on mortality and impermanence. Lives were lost, landscapes were altered, and familiar routines vanished in moments. And yet life persisted. Communities rebuilt, plants grew, animals returned, and new islands formed. Krakatoa is a reminder that even when the world seems to end, continuity remains. Time moves forward, life continues, and the planet renews itself in ways that are both predictable and miraculous. For those who visit the region today, Krakatoa is both a teacher and a witness. The blackened cliffs, the vents releasing steam, the waves crashing on fresh beaches, all speak of the past while nurturing the present. Observers are reminded of resilience, patience, and the beauty of cycles. The volcano encourages curiosity, the desire to understand forces larger than ourselves, and respect for the interconnectedness of life, land, sea, and sky. Krakatoa's story, from the eruption to the regrowth of life, reminds us that time heals and transforms. The black sky became bright again. Ash-covered lands became fertile. The ocean, once violent, became calm. Human communities rebuilt. Animals recolonized islands. Anak Krakatau continues to rise, slowly shaping the land and supporting new ecosystems. Through all this, life persists, showing that even the most extreme events are part of the ongoing rhythm of nature. The reflection on Krakatoa is also a reflection on humanity. We are capable of courage, endurance, and care. We can rebuild homes, families, and communities. We can observe, learn, and teach future generations. Krakatoa is both a warning and an inspiration, teaching humility, perseverance, and the importance of connection between humans and the natural world. Its lessons are timeless, relevant for anyone who faces sudden change or loss. And so, Krakatoa stands as both monument and teacher. It reminds us of the power of the earth, the fragility of life, and the remarkable persistence of growth. Its story continues in every new eruption of Anak Krakatau, every returning bird, every green sprout on volcanic soil, and every memory passed from survivors to children. The eruption of 1883, terrifying as it was, has transformed into a source of wisdom, beauty, and hope. In the end, Krakatoa teaches us to observe, to respect, and to marvel. It teaches that life is resilient, that communities endure, and that even the most overwhelming events contain lessons for the future. The roar of the volcano fades in memory, but its impact echoes in the sky, the sea, the land, and in every story that continues to be told. Its legacy is both quiet and immense, a reminder that life, though fragile, persists, and that the natural world is a teacher, a force and a wonder beyond comprehension. And as the sun rises over Anak Krakatau, casting golden light across blackened rock and returning waves, one can feel the quiet heartbeat of the earth. Krakatoa's taught patience, respect, courage, and hope. Its story, from cataclysm to rebirth, is a gentle reminder that the world endures, that life finds a way, and that even in moments of great fear, beauty and resilience can emerge. In this, Krakatoa's voice continues to speak, not in thunder or fire, but in the soft, persistent rhythm of life itself.